As we proceed, before we start, I wanted, and get to our recommendations, I wanted to give the board some idea of what we went through in trying to figure this out. It was an exhausting and exhaustive process, but we were able to, as you can tell from this list, which I will not read to you, get consultation not just from experts within the district, not just from our board liaisons, Director Williams and Director Winiger, but from the superintendent, from the charter schools. We had advice from every one of the district standing committees. We also went outside of that. We talked to people from outside the district, including, honestly, politicians who've run campaigns. We were trying to figure out everything that we could do to give you the best feasibility analysis we could. Further, we went to the community. We underwent both through Superintendent Kane and through members of the MBEC. Reached out to various groups and got feedback from over 450 people on their thoughts about what the district's needs were, and more importantly, what happened once people were educated about those needs. We, of course, considered the New Bridges poll, and we'll address that at length. We also considered the broader poll from Magellan, talking about people's attitudes in the state towards education. All of that was brought together through this committee. This is not a nonpartisan committee. It is a multi-partisan committee. It is a group of intelligent, active people, all of whom share only that they care deeply about the district. There were some spirited discussions at times, but I want to emphasize they were also cordial, intelligent, and fact-based. These are people who came to this committee with different views of the district and its needs, with different views of members of this board, and how the direction of the district should proceed. And yet each one of them came together to work on this proposal and to come up with the recommendations that we're about to present. We would hope that if this board decides to proceed with the Mill Bond in 2022, that will provide some example about how the community can come together to make this work. So without further ado, we start with what I came to you, or what we came to you for 6 weeks ago. That the demonstrated financial needs and commitments of the district are so significant that seeking additional funds from the voters in the near future is vital to the success of our current and future students and staff. We stand by that recommendation. Indeed, it has become more urgent the more we have researched. And that led almost inexorably to the next conclusion. A successful mill levy override and/or bond issue on the November 2022 ballot is only feasible if the district, board, and building leadership make funding the top priority, creating and executing a well-resourced, unified strategic plan for community outreach. We considered many other options, and you will see the data presented by Tanya about how we came to our conclusion. It is never our intent to mislead this board about the headwinds that you face. There are issues brought for us both by our local conditions and by national and state conditions that will require an extraordinary effort to go forward. We hope, however, at the end of this presentation, as you understand how we considered it and how we came to our recommendation, that you will understand why we believe that proceeding in 2022 is important. Here's the goal. If the board decides to go out in 2022, we will need, based upon analysis of prior votes and increase in population in the county, somewhere between 107 and 117 positive votes. That's a lot of people. There are concerns about that, and we will address them more. It is a short planning window. We, of course, will be facing a gubernatorial election, and we live, as you may have noticed, in uncertain times in terms of the economy, inflation. As you will see from the Magellan study, we live in a time where people are questioning what is going on in public education, and when people in Douglas County are questioning that, both for local and broader reasons. We considered 2023, we certainly considered 2024. I'll be honest with you, 2024 is both too late and too unlikely. Again, I will address this more once you've seen the data, but the question becomes, if not now, when? When is better? Our needs will not grow smaller. They will not reduce. This cannot be kicked far down the road. So without further, I'll pass you on to Tanya Stewart. Oh, excuse me, I forgot this slide. You've seen this before, you'll see it again. This is where we stand. I'm not going to tell you that the district will fall off a cliff if we don't find more funding in the next 2 years, but I will tell you that these needs will grow, they will get worse, and the impacts will affect our students, our staff, and our community. And now, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you, Brad, and for being introduced 3 times, and thank you, board. It's a pleasure to be here. I would be remiss if I didn't start by also thanking very much Sandra Brown-Rigg, our chair, who has done an incredible job of bringing this incredibly skilled and knowledgeable group of people that are sitting here and those who are not present today to have brought us together. And as Brad was saying, so many disparate opinions, right, about what's going on in the district. It's really a testament to Sandra's leadership, and also now I've answered the question, so I'm forever grateful. If I had to spend the next 1,000 years in a room locked with 20 people, I know exactly who it would be because we've been there. So I'm here to discuss, as Sandra's poor substitute, the results of the data that we collected. And so we're going to walk through these one by one because each piece of data tells us something different, right? We've got a series of surveys, polls that are coming from different sources, that have different statistical significances, that give us different information. And what we want to do is weave that story for you through the data of how we got to our recommendations, which then Brad will give. So I'm going to start off by talking about the New Bridge Strategy Poll, which was a random sample of Douglas County voters. It was 400 voters that were polled. And we're going to be talking about the margins of error. For those of you who are in the audience and listening and may not be familiar with the statistical polling, so a margin of error is basically telling us with 95% confidence, right? You choose your confidence interval. So the margin of error is telling us plus that amount and minus that amount, we are 95% sure that the data that we've gotten is representative of the community. So that's really what we're getting at. And the New Bridge Strategy Poll has a margin of error of plus or minus 4.9%, which is, not small, I would say. I mean, it's a margin of error that one has to take into consideration. But of course, there's always a cost benefit for margin of error, because anytime you want to have your margin of error, you have to quadruple the number of people that you're polling. That's just the way that the math works, right? So as we look at those data, that's something that we want to be able to keep in mind. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the SAC and PTO surveys that the MBEC group conducted. And fortunately, we have folks sitting here who are very much engrossed in the details of those surveys. So I will be glad to turn over any of those questions to them. Thirdly, we have the Magellan statewide survey. So this was a survey that was conducted on essentially a referendum on, just as Brad was saying, a referendum on the state of public education within the state of Colorado. And fourthly, and we've kind of combined these, or at least within this bullet point, but there are 2 different slides on them, the Douglas County School District and MBEC's post-presentation exit surveys. So a series of exit surveys that we did both on focus groups and on, all kind of wrapped around the presentation that Superintendent Kane put together. So that is a lengthy introduction to tell you what we'll be talking about. I want to start off with the New Bridge strategy and some of the good news as it relates to funding that the New Bridge Strategy Poll is telling us. At a high level, the polled participants support the Douglas County priorities as they've been laid out and as they're intended to be laid out in the MLO and the bond issues. So We have here the percentage of respondents that believe that is extremely or very important in order to accomplish the following things: attracting and retaining quality teachers and staff by increasing district salaries to be more competitive with neighboring districts, 92%. Increasing availability of student programming and career and technical education, 93%. Updating and repairing school buildings to continue providing safe, efficient, quality learning environments for students and staff, 92%. Enhancing safety and security resources, 94%. And constructing new neighborhood elementary schools and creating additions to existing neighborhood middle schools to reduce the crowding in existing schools, 77%. So you can see that the community as polled is very much in agreement with the exact same priorities that the Board of Education has established, and certainly that we as a Mill Bond Exploratory Committee would feel. Conversely, that's the good news. As it relates to polling, there is also some news that presents an opportunity. What we have seen in the New Bridge strategy, right, and we've been doing this polling since 2016, a couple of different times, we saw that fewer than 50% of the respondents rated the district performance an A or a B. It was 9% rated it an A, 36% rated it a B, so 45% in total. The grand go, no-go of the New Bridge poll. So it showed that 39% of the polled participants responded that they would vote for funding in November, right? This is lower, I think, that a lot of us were expecting, especially lower because, you know, it is off of 50% by 2 times the margin of error, right? And what I want to emphasize here is that this, while low, is a pre-interventional number. Right? So any changes that occur between now and November have the ability, potentially, as long as they're done correctly, to move this number. Whether it can move it significantly enough to pass funding is a question that remains to be seen, but it's something that has to be taken into consideration. Now, what's interesting is, so 39% of the polled respondents said yes. 43% of the polled respondents said no, and we had 18% that were undecided. So you had a very large, a very significant chunk of potential voters, almost 1 in 5 voters, that are undecided on the issue. The way that the poll was structured, so the respondents were asked, would you support this? And then they were given these questions about, or they were given statements about the compensation levels of the teachers, about the needs that the district has, and then they were also given reasons why you would vote against a bond measure. So, you know, that the inflation and the economy are challenging, et cetera. So after they heard both the pros and the cons to this, they were asked if they would change their opinion. And consistently, they maintained their opinion. So what we saw was that the polled respondents would not change their no vote even if they've been informed of the reasons for the need for increased funding. So when you give those high-level statements, it wasn't enough to move the needle. That's what we saw in New Bridge. Interestingly, also, and this came very much as a surprise to me, and I believe that it did to a lot of the other members of the committee. So the way that the poll was administered, half of the respondents were put into this lower funding group, right? So they were presented with a lower MLO and bond combined, and there was another group that was presented with a higher MLO and bond combined. The 2 groups you weren't given both and then asked which one you would prefer. You were just segregated into one or the other. But what was very surprising to us was that there was not a statistically significant difference in support between the 2. So people supported it or they did not support it, but the dollar amounts that we were talking about with respect to how the taxes would increase was not changing opinion, which I think was, again, was quite surprising to a few of us. Looking at the historical polling, so in 2016, we did one of these polls where the bond passed, or the bond yes response was at 48%, MLO yes response was at 60%. High support from registered Democrats, much more moderate support from registered Republicans, and right in between for unaffiliated, 70% for parents, 52% for non-parents. In 2018, the bond polling was at 59% yes, 66% yes for the MLO. And what we're seeing in 2022, so we've also given you the breakdown of that information. So 36% yes for the bond, 39% for the MLO. But again, because the two were not statistically off by very much, what Newbridge did was it ended up combining all of the data because that gives you more statistical validity when you end up combining the two since they weren't that far off. So in 2022, the polled support is lower than in 2018. And it's also lower than in 2016 when we decided not, or when the board at the time decided not to move forward with pursuing funding. So this comes, again, it's something that has to be taken into consideration, that there's been a significant degradation in funding support since 2016. So actually what is interesting and what I have marked down here, so the parents. So in 2022, that support number is actually a 40%. That was an error that we made in the presentation. So 40% of parents are a yes, 33% of parents are not a yes. With parents, 29% of parents who were polled, parents polled, within this poll, were undecided. These are the ones who are the most attuned to what's going on here. So that is a significant opportunity. If you have almost 1 in 3 voting parents who are still undecided. So that represents a remarkable opportunity to be able to capture those voters, right? I wouldn't be saying this if they were hard-nosed. They're undecided, which does present you with that opportunity and that ability to potentially sway voters. So one of the things that we did as a committee was to look at, or to put out a survey to SACs and PTOs. So these are, as we know, the parents that are most highly involved in the schools and are most attuned to what's happening within the schools, right? They're seeing the physical infrastructure degradation on a daily basis. They're having a high touch with the teachers. And so we put out a survey asking you, based on your knowledge, do you believe that DCSD needs an MLO? 94% said yes. Does it need a bond? 91% said yes. What is your number one reason to support the MLO? Almost 78% said teacher retention. What is your number one reason to support a bond? 55% said repair and upgrade existing schools. And the number 2 reason to support a bond was to build new schools at 30%. So these are very much in line with the priorities that we already have. And it's a really positive, again, in terms of funding, it is a positive sign that those highly involved parents that are seeing the needs on a near daily basis are convinced of those needs. This also gives you an ability to have those parents that are involved in the SACs and the PTOs, who obviously are very much in support of this, to act as allies as you go trying to get additional funding. Now, one of the things that that we didn't capture here was we didn't provide, and I say this as a caveat, right? We did not introduce dollars into how much would your taxes actually change if you were to vote for an MLO or a bond. So I just wanted to make that clear. That is, obviously a key difference versus the Newbridge polling. And we did want to touch on the Magellan Strategies statewide poll. So this is a poll that just came out. It was essentially a referendum on all of the state of education in the state of Colorado. It touched on a lot of different issues, how voters feel about public education in general, how satisfied are they with their local districts, how satisfied are they with their teachers, do they have agreement on educational priorities, are they satisfied with educational outcomes, what is the willingness to fund districts, and then also what is your general knowledge about how funding occurs. So it was a really broad-based poll. And what we wanted to do was basically distill down to some of those issues that certainly we've heard the most discussed as we've heard discussions about the Magellan poll. So firstly, there is a high favorability as it relates to teachers. 58% of the respondents said that they had a favorable opinion of teachers. After that, it becomes significantly more dissatisfied. And you see a pretty big chasm as it relates to political ideology and the perception of how public education is serving the needs of the community. So a plurality of the respondents, 42%, so more than approved. 42% disapprove of the job that the respondent's local school district is doing in educating children. Also, a plurality of the respondents, 44%, believe that school districts are on the wrong track, and that was the language that was used within the poll, versus only 28% saying that it was going in the right direction, and 28% saying that they had no opinion. A plurality of the respondents, 42%, also responded no regarding local school districts spending money wisely versus 31% yes. A plurality of respondents, 43%, who thought that school districts had sufficient funding in order to be able to meet their needs. And however, a majority of respondents, 56%, thinking that additional funding for public education will result in a better education for students. But this was very, very highly divided by political ideology. So as I have written there, 85% of registered Democrats said yes, 51% of unaffiliated voters said yes, and only 36% of Republicans said yes. So I don't think that this is really much of a surprise to those of us who are involved in issues of public education. There is a big political divide, and that's what this is reflecting. But what's interesting about this is that this varies really significantly from the polling that we did, right? This is saying, well, you know, that schools within Colorado on the whole are going in the wrong direction. But when we asked parents through the New Bridge study, do you agree with these priorities? They overwhelmingly said yes. And they overwhelmingly said that they needed to be funded. Now, what they didn't say yes to was that their taxes should go up as a result of the funding. But that's very different than what Magellan is showing. Because in Magellan, you had a plurality of folks saying, even if you give more money to school districts, it's not going to change our opinion. And that was one of those really surprising things that stood out to us. That yes, though this is showing a negative opinion of school districts generally within the state of Colorado, it's not a reflection of the beliefs that the polling that we have done is showing. So, so something to keep in mind as we talk about additionally the kind of the story of the data. So we and Superintendent Kane's staff conducted some post-presentation exit surveys. So as you know, and for the community that's listening in, so Superintendent Kane has a presentation that discusses in a very thorough but concise way about the funding needs of the district, the funding mechanisms of the district, and the funding challenges of the district, right? And things that are counterintuitive to transplants like me, who didn't come from the state of Colorado, that if the district is becoming wealthier because there's an increased tax base, that doesn't have an impact on your per pupil revenue. That's something that's not intuitive to the community. That's what this presentation takes care of, as well as the series of, you know, elaboration of the funding needs that we have. There were exit surveys that were conducted post-presentation. Now, you have to take into consideration that anybody who chooses to go and listen to Superintendent Kane is probably having a bit of self-selection bias in terms of already being interested in education. So one of the things that you have to consider when you look at these data. But 81% said that they were very likely to vote yes on a mill levy override or bond for DCSD, and 11% were likely. So we're at over 90% saying that they would be willing to vote. Again, you know, this is kind of divorced from the actual dollars of what your tax impact would be. But there's a big opportunity, right? What this is showing is that the information, so it's not just the messaging, but the information is compelling, that it effectively is able to say, these are the needs of the district, and it's able to change minds. And when you have such a large group of people, group of voters within our district that are undecideds, this is a really good piece of information to have. We also want to recognize that it's not like this is a one and done, right? Superintendent Kane and the staff didn't, put out these presentations and then they're finished. This is an ongoing, very iterative process, and which has had a lot of traction and a lot of interest and a lot of support from staff generally. And we want to recognize those activities that the district has been engaged in. So deploying the Director of Parent, Community, and Civic Engagement for summer outreach, and then these continued presentations to leadership, to external groups, to essentially anybody who will listen, is a really powerful way of continuing that work. So what I want to say is that this is clearly effective at changing minds, although unfortunately we don't have pre-data to be able to, against which to compare it, but that it does show a big disparity in how people respond when they're made aware of the funding needs and the funding challenges of the district. Similarly, MBEC took this same presentation and gave it to other members of the community within certain groups. Now, the difference here was that we sought out groups that we knew would be hostile audiences. So whereas Superintendent Keynes relied somewhat on folks who would come and listen and just be informed, come listen to the superintendent, we sought out groups that we knew weren't interested. So some of them were, a lot of them weren't, including homeschool parents, including, particular political ideologies where we knew that there was, a divide, and we were seeking those out. And what this showed, right, and well, actually, let me be clear before I say this. So this was really intended to be more of a focus group. So we were getting qualitative information from them about what are, give us information about why you would or wouldn't vote for this. But then we did ask them, how likely are you to vote for an MLO or a bond and to support the MLOs and bonds? And even with some of these hostile groups, what we're seeing is a 60% yes vote. And when you think about it, that we have from the Newbridge poll, 39%, so almost 40%, that was saying that yes, they would vote. And you've got 20% that are on the fence, that are undecided. When you add those two together, and here we're seeing 60% said that they would be willing, we know that we were able to change some minds, and we know that some of those that were undecided were able to come out firmly for funding. We think that this is a really important piece of information to share with you. That again, even if it's the MBEC that's seeking these out in a focus group, the presentation, the message, the needs, the funding challenges all present a very, very compelling story about what our children need. And that the public responds to that. So we want to, now that we've given you just some highlights of the data, we want to take you through, again, in a little bit of a more prescriptive way, what that story of the data is telling us. So we start off with a falling perception of the district performance in the last 4 to 6 years. This came through on the Newbridge Strategies poll. There's also a falling perception of educational performance statewide that came across in Magellan. Not enough current voter support to pass funding if the vote occurred today. We know that 39% plus 2 times the margin of error is not going to pass the vote if it happens today. But here's where we kind of bifurcate from Magellan. Magellan said that there was a lack of statewide agreement that the funding needs will advance the educational outcome. That's not the case here. Here, what we have are parents and voters who are willing to put their money where their mouth is if they're informed about the needs of the district. The question becomes, can you reach enough people fast enough? So we have conceptual voter agreement that the funding needs are legitimate. That came through from the Newbridge strategy poll, and it also came through the various surveys. And then when you couple that with the clear and compelling educational message to the community around the needs, that increases your chances of success. Furthermore, when you have engaged superintendent, engaged staff, engaged parent, engaged community, and hopefully engaged board to support the funding, this becomes even more possible. So it's a narrow path that we walk, but we want to present you with the path because we want to let you know that we, as a committee that has I don't know how many years of work on behalf of the Board of Education and for our children, we believe that there is a way to do it. And we believe that the data support that there is a way to do it. Even though if you're just looking at one poll here, one poll there, you may not think that. We think that there is a path. Now, what this doesn't cover are the very, very strong headwinds that are coming at us. So some of this is baked into the poll results, right? We would expect that to some degree, concerns about the economy would be baked into people's responses when they're voting for a poll. However, we don't know what the economy is going to be like in November. We don't know what the economy is going to be in 2023. We do know that it's going to have an effect. We've certainly spoken with political leaders whom we invited to come and speak with us, bipartisan. It was a remarkable and very cordial and frankly inspirational conversation about their willingness to come together and present a unified message, a bipartisan message on behalf of our children. So that was amazing and potentially something that could help when you do have demographics within the district of a lot of folks that are on fixed incomes, a shrinking pool of students, and a generally aging population. These are headwinds that we simply have to face, and that as you make your decision, you have to take into consideration. Also, we have the upcoming property assessments. As properties will be revalued higher, we know that this is going to happen. Taxes will also increase. The extent to which that will happen is unknown, but it's a factor that will be coming up within the next couple of years. And obviously, political polarity is going to be playing a factor because there are ideologies everywhere. But what we saw what we did see in the polling was that political leanings play a role. What we also saw was that there was a tremendous amount of support from parties and, as we know, certainly from us, that this is something and a message that transcends the political ideology. This is a place where those who are committed to the well-being of children come together. And so to end, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, but you really do we see that there is a remarkable opportunity with a substantial, persuadable group of potential voters. And again, it's a matter of how do you get those? How do you get your champions to already advocate for that and use the allies that you have embedded already within the district. So with that, I will turn it back over to Brad. And again, I thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present. Nope, doesn't want to go.
There may be those watching, there may be those on the dais who are saying, Brad, we've got a poll that says we've got less than 40% support. What are you doing here? They may be saying that to Sandra. You know us. We're not unknown quantities. These people are not unknown quantities. They're people here who have served various portions of the district for many years. People on all sides. And yeah, we spoke to the Democrats. To see the Democrats and the Republicans saying they'll march hand in hand and door to door was one of the more amazing things that we got to see. And by the way, that wouldn't have happened if Sandra had not had the ability to bring those people together. But if you're skeptical, we understand. If you look at the poll results, we understand. But we think you have to do it anyway. In part because, as Tanya said, it's not as simple as people don't like it right now. We are in an extraordinary period of national political polarity, and that has trickled down to the state, and it has trickled down to the county, and it's trickled down to this board. And that has impacted people's view of the district, and of the funding needs. That's a reality I don't have to lecture any of you about. But when we come together, when it's presented as coming together, when it is presented as a unified front, things change. Yes, there is hostility out there to schools in general and at times to this board. When we ask what are the issues on outgoing surveys, trust and transparency comes up. If you ask who don't you trust, every name on the board comes up. Okay? There's no unified on that. What there is an understanding of polarization. We tend to think that that is in some ways reflective of broader national policies. But when you drill down on it, it's shallow opposition. There are people in this county who will never vote to increase funding. We know that. We've known that forever. That's the demographics. But we've also known and we've learned that despite headwinds, if we do the right thing, and we means everybody in this room, that can change. There has been an extraordinary effort in the last few months by Superintendent Kane and Stacy Rader and others to reach out to the community, and that is starting early. And that will bear fruit. We cannot guarantee that a bond in 2022 and a mill in 2022 will pass. As a matter of fact, there is a significant chance that it will not. But if we don't do it now, when do we? Do you truly believe that the political headwinds will change in 2023 when we have a board election or after a gubernatorial election? If you think you can predict the economy in 2023, there are many valuable jobs that you can do. We know. Donald Rumsfeld once said there are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. Our unknown is whether we can educate enough people. That's what we know now. We know what the challenges are. We know that education overcomes those challenges. And to wait longer on the hopes that the conditions will get better when there is no way to know that puts us in an extraordinarily difficult situation. You couple that with four undeniable trends. One, we will, without more funding, continue to be the worst paying teacher salary in the Denver metropolitan area, and eventually that will have an impact. You cannot consistently play before market rate and keep the best people and attract the best people. And our educational assistants get paid less, would be paid more at Starbucks. They stay with us for good reasons, because they love kids, because they want to do it, but we can't ask them to do that for the next 5 years. Two, our schools will get older. Those of us who were involved in the 2018 bond knew, and I will be blunt, that that wasn't going to fix everything. That we were trying to come back from 12 years of neglect. And that while we did extraordinary work, Rich Cosgrove and his team did extraordinary work in identifying and moving forward on that. The needs continue. 17 million more next year. Probably 20 more than the year after that, 20 to 30 more after that once we spend the remaining bond funds. Those needs will not change. They will get worse. Buildings do not heal. Three, growth in areas of the district will not slow down. I drove down Crowfoot to get here. I swear there's a dozen new houses on that road alone that weren't there when I came down Wednesday. Sterling Ranch will continue to grow. Crystal Valley will explode. The canyons will grow. And as a member of Long Range Planning Committee, we have rearranged the deck chairs. There's no more room. In 5 years, Coyote Creek, which is now serving Sterling Ranch, could be at 150% of capacity. Crystal Valley will have 4 schools in excess of 100%. Those kids have to go somewhere. And if you think that the solution is to put them in more trailers, if you want to be the district that educates its kids in double wides and the security risks associated, that's a decision you will have to make, because without additional funding, that's where we will be. Oh, and trying to hire more bus drivers. We don't pay them as well as Starbucks does either. And right now, we can't even hire enough mechanics to keep the buses on the road. Those are realities. Those are trends that have to continue, and we have to address them. So here's the plan. 144 days. That's a ridiculous number. That's how long we have between now and Election Day. And yet, when we asked people on both sides of the political spectrum, people you know, can we do it in 144 days? They said, yeah. It will require extraordinary work. One point made, and it surprised me, but it also makes me understand it, is that maybe we run these campaigns too long. Does anybody else love a 3-year presidential campaign? That maybe the time has come to get back to the period of time where instead of years of going back and forth, we do a focused, intelligent outreach program and do the best we can in 144 days. You knew I was going to come to number 2. Okay? Unquestionably, the issues, the concerns expressed by Douglas County voters reflect those of nationwide concerns. We are part of the nation. We are part of the state. We are, in some ways, slightly better than the rest of the state in how we're perceived. But there's no doubt that some of the publicity about what has gone on with the district has harmed us. That said, we can have policy differences and express them in strong and intelligent ways and still come together, as this committee did. There are people on here who have never voted the same way I have in an election. But every one of them here, and more who weren't able to make it today, agree on this proposal. And that is the opportunity. If the district leadership agrees, if the people all throughout the district, if the parents and the teachers, but most importantly, the leadership, agree and provide the education and reach out to the people that they know can do this. I personally spoke to ex-board members. I spoke to campaign managers. We had people come in, and everyone expressed concern, and everybody expressed the knowledge that if the needs are fully explored, the possibility exists. But it has to be, bluntly, the primary message of this district. It has to be the number one thing. And every time somebody from the district speaks about any issue, it has to also say, oh, but by the way, we need the money. So how do we do that outreach? It has to be intensive, it has to be broad, but there also has to be focus. Right now, there is a lack of understanding throughout the district about the needs for our new schools. That has to be brought out, and those are potential voters. If we go to Sterling Ranch, if we go to Crystal Valley, if we go to the Canyons, if we go to Crowfoot, and we say, we are doing this, we go to Sierra, we are doing this, not just for these 3 schools, but by the way, there's 3 new elementary schools on the 6-year horizon. We can't build a new elementary school 3 summers from when we pass a bond to when we open a new elementary school. And by the time, if we go in 22 and we pass it, by the time we get those schools built, we'll need 3 more. And we have to create a cadence, a process, so that every year we can go out to the people of the community and say, thank you, you've done a great job, we're getting there, now here are the new needs and here why you should trust us. We have to go beyond the parents, we have to go beyond the teachers, we have to go farther than the typical issue voters. Sandra has been clear throughout that we have to put this beyond partisan politics, we have to put it beyond our normal people. We have to reach out to non-parents, we have to reach out to non-voters. We have to bring that 20% in, and we have to convert some percentage of the no's. Oversight. For better or for worse, perhaps incorrectly in some situations, there is a concern, a certain percentage of the district, that there is not enough oversight in our spending. That can be fixed. Those are your policies. We can understand what we learned from the last bond. We can create, we can, if necessary, improve. We can put together a bond spending plan that is open, honest, and transparent so that people know what we want, so that they do not perceive the money is being spent without warning. Transparency is vital and important, and that starts with every element of the district. The campaign must be based on education. There are those who will be persuaded by pretty words. Not enough of them. But we can persuade people through information. We know that, we've seen it. We've gone to people who are not happy with the district. We've gone to people who don't vote for this. Krista Gilstrap, who is not here unfortunately today, tells a story about doing a focus group when somebody walked in and said, "Why are you wasting my time asking for more money?" And at the end of the presentation volunteered to work for the bond committee. We can do this. It won't be easy. And it won't be quick, and it won't be simple, but it can be done. Specific. This is something that came across over and over and over again. The bond language must say this is where we will spend it. The mill language must be absolutely clear that the money will go to those who touch the students on a regular basis. It has to go to teachers. It has to go to staff. It has to go bus drivers, who are as important as anybody, getting your kids there to and from. We have to convince them that this myth of the overloaded, bloated administration, which, by the way, exists in every school district in the United States, has to be addressed. And that has to be addressed by, if you give us the mill money, we will spend it on teachers. And by the way, the word competitive rings, it echoes. No matter how conservative you may be about money, if you say you can't, if you look somebody in the eye and say, "Are you able to hire people at 30% less than market wage?" they'll listen. And do you want the cheapest possible teacher teaching your kid? I've touched on some of this before. There are a number of people out there that we believe can be convinced if they know, but they have to reach out to them. Honestly, in 2018, we were able mostly to pass the bond by preaching strongly to the choir and telling them to get out. People who traditionally funded these things. There was insufficient outreach across the board. That cannot happen here. We have to reach the business groups. We have to reach the developers. If you're building houses in Crystal Valley or Crowfoot or Sterling Ranch, there is no reason you should not be marching along saying this is what we need. Because this is what their community makes their communities work. And by the way, even if you don't have kids, we have to make sure that people know that elementary schools, that public schools, that neighborhood schools of all kinds are the center to a safe and secure community. They give kids places to be. They give community bases. They're places to gather. And if we can convey that to the people who live in those areas, then we have a chance. I've moved to the possessive plural, I guess. We are fortunate that we've already started. I have spoken to members of the Board of Education. I've spoken to former members of the Board of Education. This message is out there. It has not been the dominant message about Douglas County Board of Education, but it can be. If we can get out joint letters to the editor, if we can convince people that whatever other divisions may exist, that we all stand together, that's a story in and of itself. And that's already started. We have to mobilize teachers. I'm not going to lie to you. One of the concerns about our responses from teachers is that, yeah, they'll support us, and no, they won't march. That has to change. They have to trust their principals. They have to trust the district. They have to trust the board, because they are our best communicators. They are also, however, extraordinarily educated people who can understand that a mill that increases their value and their pay is in their best interest. They are extraordinarily educated people that know that building new schools means new teachers and better education. They are extraordinarily educated people who understand that overcrowded schools, deteriorating schools, are not what's best for their students. So if we can convince those teachers to once again stand up, we can't put it on their back. That's not all their job. But if we can mobilize them, they are a powerful force. You have community involvement, you have community groups already that exist within the district, the DAC, the FOC, the various SACs, the PTOs, the LRPC, the Student Advisory Group, the MBEC, which I hope will present a lessons learned and how we go forward as we move on. We have learned lessons. We need to utilize those committees. We have to have a well thought out major plank. We have to emphasize to the voters that these are the representatives who are not elected, who are volunteering to make sure that this is done right. We have to build trust in the community. That means we have to listen as well as speak. Maybe not my strength, but there are others who are better at it. And we have to, again, make sure that when we are given money, we spend it well, we spend it wisely, and we spend it in ways that the voters know. And we truly believe that if all of that can be done, that there is a chance that that path exists. As I said, it's important to say, as important as it is to get the funding, we'll not fall off a cliff if this happens, but the consequences will be real. If we don't compete on compensation, we will lose teachers. That is basic economics. Our seniors know this. They study that in econ class. Supply and demand continues to exist, the iron law. And if we cannot fund our district and our compensation, then we will eventually suffer from that and perhaps have to face reduction. Without bond money, maintenance needs have to be made out of the operating budget. And that means people in the board, in the administration have to decide, are we going to hire another educational assistant, or are we going to replace the cooler? That's not easy. That is where we were for 10 years. Where we every year had to scrape and struggle and find and move money to try to deal with the most significant issues. And more importantly, we live in a world, and I don't like mentioning this, but it's the truth, safety and security has to be addressed in new ways every single year. It's $10 to $11 million most years. And if we don't have a continual funding process to help with that, if we do not have bond funds to help with that, then that money has to come out of operating. And then there's the new schools. As I said, we're not just talking about the 3 new schools that are talked about now. We're talking about creating a process where we acknowledge that growth is coming. If we don't build community anchor schools, if we do not create those communities that are necessary, then we are not putting our kids in the best educational environment. We are not providing the resources and the needs to those. Yes, in some cases, maybe we solve that with buses that are getting old and drivers that we can't hire. But that is a temporary solution at best. Mobiles are by every definition a temporary decision at best. Yes, our charter schools, who are public schools and who have served so many of our students well, may step up to help us. But we face risks, particularly in Sterling Ranch, perhaps in Canyons, where we have neighborhood school voids, of creating charter school-only areas. Charter schools are great, but they are focused. They address a specific student body. And honestly, they do not address our special education needs as well as neighborhood schools. We cannot afford to create a charter school-only area on the west side of our district. One of the biggest discussions we had, and I will continue to emphasize this, is that why 2022 and not 2023? I've talked about the unpredictability. But most importantly is delayed is not denied. I apologize. I get emotional. These things have to continue. We've started these. The district has to do a better job of engaging the public. We have dealt with an unprecedented pandemic that has influenced and impacted that kind of communication. It has made everything 35% harder. We are only now recovering from that. We have to take this opportunity to build robust, intelligent outreach programs that last beyond the need for money, that build trust and transparency in the entire board and in the entire district so that we develop that cadence. This is what we've got to say. It's a narrow path. It wasn't be the one we would choose, but it's the one we stand on as I stand here today. Funding has to pass. It has to be found. And it has to be done based on an overwhelming behavior, an overwhelming attempt. We cannot leave these stones unturned. We cannot leave these efforts unmade. Thank you very much for your attention. I will say only for the final time that this committee is astonishing. It is led brilliantly. It consists of people as dedicated and as intelligent as I've ever had the opportunity to work with. But then again, I work mostly with lawyers. But I would work with these people on any project and any time, and I suspect that if you allow us to go to a bond mill, you will see these faces again.